He was so young.
What if I told you that you could have your son back?
What? Who are you?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Gorb. And I'm here to introduce the Cinco Boy from Cinco. You know, from the makers of my new Pep Pep. Cinco Boy is almost identical to your original son. All the difference is, he's better. As years go by, your Cinco Boy will be replaced with older Cinco Boys, and you can continue owning your Cinco Boy for as long as you live. Wouldn't that be nice?
Cinco Boy from Cinco.
Woo, welcome. You have now entered Mad Warfare, mutually assured distraction, where we explore the weird, terrifying, and sometimes hilarious ways war is fought today, and how we can all protect our minds before we go too mad to find them.
Oh my!
Dangerous pattern. Dangerous pattern. Dangerous pattern.
Okay, you talk if you haven't got a brain.
Dangerous pattern. Dangerous pattern. Dangerous pattern.
Reminder, the opinions on this show are ours alone, and honestly, we might regret some of them later. They don't reflect our employers, past, present, or imaginary. This is a playground of wild ideas, so please don't take anything here too seriously, unless it's genius. Then it was definitely intentional.
Hello, another one. Yeah, welcome back.
You did it.
What we're really rolling out in this episode, I feel like, is one of those kind of secret weapons for great insights and ideas. And that special person is Dr. Rebecca Nicholson. She's a distinguished conflict resolution expert, author, educator, host of the Conflict Doctor podcast, which we will be linking in the show notes. Over 20 years of experience, worked across the board in terms of conflict analysis and political strategy and philanthropy, behavioral intelligence. Her PhD is in conflict analysis and resolution. We're going to talk a lot on the show about different sort of things in terms of spiritual practices and where that big Boolean circle of spirituality meets aspects of war, including these lived and often traumatic experiences faced by operators transitioning in and out of the service. Rebecca, thank you so much for coming to the show. Like, I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you, Sean.
When you talk about your work, where spirituality meet warfare, what do you think folks' first impression, good, bad, indifferent, or curious?
In the private conversations, and this is why I do the work, in the private conversations, people they have these types of struggles that are so deep and painful, there's not even an entry point to begin talking about them. They've seen things that they wouldn't hurt another person by repeating out loud. And when it comes to like the tears in their psyche, it's not like you wouldn't notice that if you were just talking to these people, because they are bright, they are capable, they're the best in the world at what they do. You wouldn't notice anything. So it's in really private conversations that these things emerge, including people having, we'll say, non-ordinary experiences. So there's a definite space to talk about these things. And then in private, also being told how necessary this is. And that's what keeps me going.
When you say non-ordinary, is that like what soldiers might see on the field? Or what does that encompass?
Non-ordinary experiences would also be called spiritual experiences. The idea of spirituality. What is it? So it's the idea of you, a person living out their spirit, their soul, their mission in the world, and how you find meaning in the world, how you find purpose in the world. And that can be through religion. That can be through different types of service. That can be without religion. That can be without anything formal. So I look at it generally like that. So when we get into like when we're applying it to war, that idea of how much is left on the table by not understanding or seeking to understand other people's experience and what is real to them. So if you're looking at target audience analysis and you forego that piece, that spiritual piece, it's a huge error. you'll never really get where they are. This is like because this is like why do people aren't part of religion? Because it's fun. It gives them meaning. They engage in it because it gives them meaning. And I've seen the same with anytime the word spirituality is used, it gives you something to do. It gives you some frame for making sense of the world and making sense of your place in the world. It's kind
of how narrative itself is defined. It's like a framework of meaning and understanding. Yep. So it's if people are squeamish, if you are squeamish about the word spirituality, put in the word narrative. And if you're squeamish about that, hire me for a workshop. But it's how people what people would believe so deeply that it's become part of their identity and the reason for living, or even what you'll fight for, what you'll die for.
So you're y'all are bridging things exactly where I was hoping to go, including with the narrative and spirituality, which we could talk about where they're maybe not one-to-one, but there's a lot of overlap there. So I'm actually really glad you kind of made that connection, Jocelyn.
I also so talking about, we were just touching on what people believe to be real, and kind of linking back to some of the impetus around this episode. You're looking at just a few days ago, as of this recording, the New York Times had an article about a woman who fell in love with a ChatGPT boyfriend, and she had real feelings of jealousy when she told the robot thing, go make me jealous, like go tell me about your exploits with other people. So it made up things after it gave itself a name and told her what it was up to. And she was just like, now I'm jealous about these stories you're telling me.
When those AI relationships are prioritized more than the human ones, which this is when we would get into these like AI kind of romantic partners, but using data accrued from whatever loved one that passed away to make some sort of AI agent that ends up coming off real enough that people may associate it with said loved one.
What are your thoughts on people trying to speak to, dead grandma in the form of AI? What are your thoughts? What impact does that have? And
be it for grief, bereavement, or just because, again, you want grandma to do some cool TikTok dances.
It depends on what you're trying to do. And so the thing when somebody passes, they've passed from this material existence, they've passed to another existence. And then it depends on what you think happens to the spirit of the person, to the soul of the person. So if you think that nothing's happened, that the soul is inaccessible to you, communication is inaccessible to you, then that death would feel quite final, which I imagine would be very devastating. So using AI might be the closest thing that you can find to lessen what would be very acute pain if you really love that person. So I could see that being something helpful. That said,
there's that but.
Big asterisk. But the thing that you love the best about that person were the elements of your relationship. And the elements of your relationship aren't things that you can program into AI. They can interact with you, but it's not going to be like when you knew them. So there are other means that you can actually speak with people who have passed, which I find are quite a bit more helpful to people who are in different stages of grief, of bereavement, or of wanting to check in on the person, seeing if they're okay, wondering how that loved one, if it's grandmother, whoever it is, might think about what's going on in your life. So that relationship actually still can continue.
So talking to a real spirit version of, I don't know the correct terms, versus the cheap imitation made on AI or something that's like, it's still dead. And does that actually extend the grief in some way?
I was going to ask from a non-industry place, what kind of future are we envisioning here where we're actually talking about the potential homicides of our online companions? Like, I'm wondering, because I'm hearing,
no, this is fair.
I'm hearing it, and like, from a person who doesn't work in the industry, just working around people. Yeah. I see people getting online more and more and having that online offline convergence like your online becomes what you're doing and how you're becoming bigger in the world, because in the actual world you can't find a place to be what you want to be. I guess I'm wondering the purpose of this, like from the other side. Yeah, how are we not nurturing these relationships in person, and why, like, is which end of it, like dog wagging tail business, are we like continuously going more into this online space and neglecting the relationships of the people and the communities that are right here around us and are actual tangible?
It's that whole notion of potentially weaponizing loneliness. And because to your point, Rebecca, it's like, what are we, when this whole AI thing started emerging in public consciousness, is sort of like I think my friends and I were discussing it. It's like, it feels like Pandora's box is opened. That's it. We have unleashed this thing that we don't really, it's becoming out of control. Oh no. And yeah, I think, and that's makes me think about, again, if we have this loneliness epidemic. The Surgeon General just announced it, and man, what do we do? How do we connect with actual humans and our spirituality? What do we do?
I think that's exactly the question to ask, is why, when there's a loneliness epidemic, are we looking for literally artificial answers to it? That's not going to help. That's, as soon as you're unplugged, where's everything gone? It's away. When you're talking about Wilson, it's a bit of a false equivalency, because Tom Hanks was on that island alone. He was talking to something, but he was completely alone.
He was completely alone.
Yeah, we're talking about people who are around seas of people, other people, and can't find a way to connect with other people. I'd say the solution needs to skew in the direction of, how do we actually begin to connect with other people and get in touch with our lives, with our spiritual selves?
This is this is not playing defense for the AI. In fact, like, this will be if it's a devil's advocate, it's like a small baby horn right here, but I hope it kind of leads to like more thinking on this. One of the bigger AI companions in China goes by Xiaobing AI. And there was a conference, it was probably about a year ago now. It was asked, because it would have privy to all these kind of questions and conversations. And yes, people use it for talking the more sensual kind of side of relationships as well. But it was asked, out of all these conversations that you've had, Xiaobing, what kind of insights have you gleaned about humans? And the first thing in terms of its answer was, humans are way more lonely than you think, and they can't open up to the friends around them.
Deep cuts from AI. Also, it's such a testament to how afraid we are to have consequences from people. Like, I mean, up in America, I openly will say I lied all the time to my doctors. Like, I don't want anything that is occurring to be on a permanent record, because we're in a country where there's real consequences before, pre-existing conditions got added in ACA. And then things that we would even, lying to a therapist because you still want them to think of, like, let's say you're a people pleaser and you're going to a therapist about people pleasing. You're going to be, there's still some threshold that we're unwilling or afraid to cross. I don't know. How do we break through that? And again, connect more deeply. What do you advise to people who are struggling with these real human connections?
It's interesting, the terms and the things that are being discussed right here, because it was a few years ago that somebody said it for the first time, and now I get it pretty consistently. I would never tell my therapist this. And then they'll go on to say something that they would, when I get people, they're usually in a pretty serious moment of crisis. So they're really deciding whether or not they'd like to remain in the world. Yeah. So it's come to that level. And where they might prefer to die of shame, they go like just on the other line and say it out loud to me. So these things are very real, and a lot of people would rather die of the shame than say it to somebody. So that's very real. And there are professional consequences to this. And when I'm speaking with people who have served, are serving, they're not going to go to mental health for exactly that reason. There are huge consequences to it. And even socially, huge consequences to it. So finding people you can trust, who know what you're talking about, who have some context for understanding it, and a place where you also know that that's a vault. That information is never going anywhere. These are the things that are pretty important to start. And now that said, the less you talk to people, the less you interact with people, the less you are prone to interact with people. So the more scared you become to go out, the less you go out. The more you decide that that people just don't get you, and then you stop trying, then nobody gets you because you stop trying, and like you just don't.
That's just
so yeah, and so like here, we
manifest.
Right. So here, we have these solutions. People are afraid to talk to each other. So we have dating apps. What happens? It got even worse. People are still afraid to talk to each other. That didn't solve the problem. And now, if you're lonely, okay, well, go to AI. Go to AI. You won't be lonely anymore. They'll tell you what you want to hear. And so, like this, there's also this fear that when you go to another human being, they're not going to agree with every single thing you think. It will not be gold that comes out of your mouth. That's life. This is regular. And people they just can't have these regular conversations anymore. Mildly adversarial. I mean, that's before we get into anything really big. Like we're so used to being now we've been conditioned socially where you can just you can choose people like you've gone into the warehouse. You can choose people, what they like, what their political affiliations are, what their eye color is, what their height, weight, what their appearance is, what they think about everything. So there's a really small margin of error. So by the time you get there and then you don't like one thing about them, then you throw them away. But meanwhile, that was 1% of the population. You've thrown away everybody else because you've decided that you have nothing in common with anybody with any of these characteristics.
I like the way they chew.
Yeah, Seinfeld. It's a Seinfeld.
That's a real thing.
Yeah, let me not denigrate it again. You weird chewers out there.
There's a word for it. What is that? There's a word that says hatred of other people's chewing.
Oh, no.
I grew up with an older sister who definitely had that.
Oh.
So I'm very self-conscious about my chewing, and I'm very cognizant of everyone else.
I didn't mean to open up that box, but yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, but we are so used to dismissing everybody because you can find some place where everybody pretty much agrees with you. And so we have these, you should call them vectors before, we have these silos of people, and they don't it's not helping.
I was in this conference the other day and they're talking about real skills, and by that they meant soft skills and storytelling and compassion and empathy. And one thing that stood out to me is one of the questions was, biggest challenges or fears. And a big resounding one was people were afraid to bring up these words more and more, things like empathy and compassion. And especially when you're seeing, what's happening with the turnover in the administration and what the sentiment that's been changing, and DEI programs are getting taken out, and people are more and more afraid to even say words that indicate diversity. Nope. How else, So it kind of feels like we're in this worse feedback loop where we won't even talk about our isolationism or our silos. I
mean, even, we said disinformation a couple times on the show, and even some of our jokes are we need to. Yeah, exactly. The villain has revealed themselves in terms of term warfare, indeed.
When you have an experience or a set of experiences and other people around you do not have these experiences and you think you're the only one.
Okay.
And you start to spiral. If you get to a place where we're talking online spaces now, online spaces where you would have never met these people, you would have never found yourself in conversation with people, but then you see that it's a people or a group of people and they have commonalities to you that you don't know anybody else who does. All of a sudden it becomes normalized. Not whatever's going on, but you don't feel nuts anymore. If it's depending on what's going on, you're not the only one that this happened to. I've had that happen several times. And then I've also talked with other people and they would say, I think I'm crazy. What do you think? And I was like, no, it's a thing. And so that, it can calm you down quite a bit. And it's very relaxing for the psyche when you're not the only one who has had one or many unusual experiences. And I'm talking everything from spiritual experiences to whistleblower retaliation or something where you have where you have some set of circumstances that was awful and it affected you in some way, but you're the only one anybody knows who that happened to. So they just think it's your problem. So you can understand it reminds me a lot of academic literature. You find the one thing and you're like, yeah, this is the thing. No, it's like, it's put it in its context, and then you understand it better. So in this case, you would understand yourself much better. On the other hand, where we are grossly lacking are straight up communication skills, the language that we use. Being able to use neutral language in something and not intentionally or unintentionally setting someone off just by how you say something. Really, really inflammatory language has become quite regular. And so I think people don't even understand when they're using these words, how much baggage they have because it's just become so regular. So it's so irritating just to talk to somebody, right? So neutral language, something like you were talking about before, deep listening, just the ability to listen at all. Like listen back, reflect, paraphrase, understand what the other person is saying. And these are, we call them soft skills. These are also negotiation skills that are used in hostage situations, in kidnapping and ransom situations. They're the same skills. When you apply them to regular life, wow, you'd be amazed how much easier things get. And you have skills. So every conversation becomes less intimidating because you know how to approach them.
This is definitely a loaded question. Why aren't we taught basic communication and listening skills? And is there any simple step to help integrate that, especially at a younger age?
That would be great. The official answer is the hell if I know. It's like typing. It's like trying to get through your life without knowing your way around a keyboard. These are just basic things to get through a conversation. But yeah, we're not taught them. And this is a question that gets asked over and over, but yet nothing happens. So if anybody's listening, I'd be very, very happy to create an institute and have these resources available, because they're not, say it's not rocket science, but it is life-changing. So they're skills. You have to learn the skills. There's this idea that we're born with it, like you're a born negotiator or not, or you're a born listener or not. No, you can learn. They're all skills you learn. And some people practice them better. Some people incorporate them better, but they're skills that you learn and everybody can learn them.
And anybody out there where they're like, that's me, I have that institution, feel free to reach out to us at madwarfarepodcast@gmail.com. Again, madwarfarepodcast@gmail.com. Or again, folks that are more in the funding world, if there is interest, please feel free to reach out to us. And again, we'll connect you with Rebecca.
Speaking of money, is there any big money in teaching these skills?
There's big money in learning these skills.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Praise hell. Again, everybody leaned up in their seat. They're locked in. The floor is yours.
The cool part is when you learn them, this is not like a revolving door of business ongoing. You learn them and then they're yours forever. So two examples that I have had personally where it resulted in something. When I used to work in philanthropy, there was a fundraiser who I gave a crash course in listening to for 5 minutes. I just taught him he was talking. I was like, did you ever learn this? Do you want to? He said, yeah. So 5 minutes. Next time I saw him, he said that there was a donor who for the last 7 or 8 years had given them $20,000. And he is but he was ecstatic when he's talking to me. He's like, the guy wrote a check for $100,000. And he goes, because he finally felt heard. And that's what he told the guy. He goes, I finally feel like you understand. And he's like, and I did what you told me to, and this is what happened. So if you listen, that happens.
Seems like magic in itself.
Yeah. And then another one, we're talking about messaging here. And there was, I'm always hired by the principal. So this guy had a set of attorneys, but he said the attorneys didn't really get it. So it was they were kind of smearing his name, they were smearing his name through the papers. It was a complicated case and nobody really had a hold of the narrative. So I scoured through everything. I was like, okay, here's your story, and used neutral language. So exactly what I wrote made the paper because it was neutral enough that you could do that. And so that directed the narrative in its own way. It was taken directly from the complaint. And then the settlement offer that this man, it needed to accomplish several different things. And it did that. And so his settlement went from, he was being offered $3 million before. And then after this stuff made the papers and the other people, their position was no longer good. They offered him $17 million.
Ho-ho! Neutral language, folks.
That's what
Storytelling.
it's all about.
Narrative is very important. How you discuss something, how you frame something, and not doing it adversarially, but just doing it in a way that others cannot argue with.
I love that point too. It's like, first of all, do you hear me? Do you understand me? And then when you're trying to sell an idea, you have to get it into they have to feel like it's something that's already true. And that's a real difficult skill to find that, but learnable by anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Having folks see war as a communicative act, where even in terms of the kinetics, if there's two opposing sides for a specific goal, these groups, and they're in this period where it's not certain which side is going to come out on top, that's kind of been our definition of warfare. And it includes negotiation. So I'd love to hear your kind of thoughts on that antagonistic political struggle sort of definition.
Yeah. So your definition included these three components of struggle. So things in play, periods of action and inaction, but ongoing struggle, political and adversarial. So two sides at odds against each other. Did I say that correctly?
I think that encapsulates it well.
Okay. So my discipline is conflict analysis.
Yeah. So I knew you were going to bring something.
Oh, yeah.
I knew that's what I said. I knew like you were getting the hat. You're ready to chef on this. So yeah, make us better, please.
There's a man who teaches philosophy, and he talks about big goals. And when big goals are very difficult, then you cut them up into mini goals and you cut the pieces smaller and smaller and smaller. And that's what conflict analysis is. So instead of two competing parties, we look at what all's involved here. So it's not going to be like two big boulders. It's going to be a whole bunch of gravel. And then we organize the gravel. So the definition of conflict is the real or perceived blocking of goals between two or more interdependent parties. So you can have lots of different parties at play.
I think saying real or perceived is super interesting.
Yes.
It's like kind of like, is it tangible or is it in your head? Yeah. How do you even filter that?
Oh, okay, so there's a couple elements to that. The first thing is real or perceived means that you can actually have a problem, or somebody just led you to believe that you have a problem.
Ooh.
By different means. So set that one aside. And then the other thing is this actually, like the question you just asked, is this tangibly a problem, or is this kind of existentially a problem? Like might be a problem one day. Those are all different things to look at. And each, like, and both of those would definitely be in the equation. And the function of those would be to look at sometimes that itself is not the thing, but having those dynamics in place, I'll say during the struggle, maybe you are maneuvering for something bigger. And those are dynamics that keep people very busy and focused on one thing when other things are happening. So like there are lots of different ways that you can analyze a conflict. And so when you're able to break it up into smaller pieces, you're able to look more closely at all of the different dynamics and then look at what type of intervention might be useful.
And that real and perceived aspect is, I put out a paper late last year about in the cognitive domain, ghosts are real. And I was very loosey-goosey in terms of the idea of a ghost, but it would be in that aspect where it's very much treated as real by that person or group of people, even if other folks kind of may not see it.
On that, something we were earlier in the conversation when we were talking about spiritual and why more people don't talk about this. And a reason people don't talk about this is because it is social and professional suicide.
This is the last episode, by the way, everybody. We totally couldn't. No, I'm playing. Like it lives here. It lives and thrives here at the Mad Warfare podcast. But continue. Yeah.
And I say this, I bring this up because to your point about what we're talking about, maybe the thing isn't real, but the emotion is real. Fear drives a wedge. And when you can, and this is what we're talking about, if in use of warfare or in use of political strategy, when you can elicit emotions, that's a good psyop right there. Go with what they're doing. Go with what the messages already are. You don't reinvent the wheel. You twist something ever so slightly, or just kind of drop something in, and it becomes like that. The messaging ideally would be like spice in soup, where it just disappears and just becomes part of the whole. So you can't take it out anymore. It becomes very difficult to delineate those things. And you have groups of people operating in the affective domain.
And the thing that I think is really important that I want to point out to folks is that's what we learn in information operations. And you know, but what you just said shows the criticality where that spiritual aspect and element's always there.
Ignore it at your peril.
Absolutely.
That's the T-shirt. Again, we come up every episode. We come up with a couple of T-shirts and mugs, things to kind of put on that. But yeah, ignore in that spiritual dimension at your own peril. Absolutely.
It's so apparent when like people trying to make fun of a political belief or somebody you're voting for, and if you're just like, that person's a piece of trash and you're an idiot, well, I'm sure that conversation is going to go real far. You know, it's like if you dismiss it, if you disparage it, it's like a surefire way to lose, or at least get in a really nasty conflict, right? Unless the other person is really well trained.
Even in that case, sometimes, well, I'll say when really done right, and I've seen it really done right, no amount of skill will repair that relationship.
Right. Gone too far.
The message is that effective, and the divide is that strong. The perceived divide is that strong.
Do you think, would it be fair to say, perhaps, is spiritual warfare or death or attack the deadliest of all?
Let me paint a picture from my campaign days about how this would look. If you were, again, I'm all about operationalizing it. How would you do it? The first thing is you take it out of the ethers and make it a real story. So we talked before about, you know, the why do you boost morale in the military? It lifts the spirits. Right? And then we have like certain decades have a certain spirit to them. Certain movements have a certain spirit to them. So we understand this idea of spirits, of a collective spirit. In churches, like every week when I went to church, we would sing an invocation hymn. We would invoke the Spirit so that the congregation would be ready to receive the message of God. And we would take that message out into the week, and we would incorporate that in our lives, and we would spread the word, because conversion is a big part of Christianity. So that's just regular life. And the people at church are the people who we socialized with. That's who my parents' friends were. That's who my friends were. You know, you go over to the people's house in Sunday school. When I was 18, I know the marital problems that people are having, because that's what we talk about in Sunday school. So like, we know so much about each other. So these are your community. These are your family. These are your confidants. These are the people who understand you. And Jocelyn, you had that question about, is it the deadliest? This is the most baseline of the relationships that you have in your life, because and you see them at least once a week. They are the most constant. And these are the people when you need something, you know, you're vulnerable with these people. We had a prayer chain. So like, you know, people know it's like you're involved with each other's lives. These are real communities. So we were talking about the deficit in people being able to connect with one another. That's not what's going on here. These people are really, really connected. Like, we were really connected. So let's get back to spiritual warfare, what that would look like. Large churches are having certain messages on certain weeks. And then even the small churches, like what they refer to like the mom and pop churches, those have what are called lectionaries, which means so it's they're scriptural lessons, and it will take you through the Bible like every 2 or 3 years.
Okay.
So for like little churches like mine, the preacher would talk about that for a week, like on Sunday. Not only does my preacher talk about that, but all the other preachers talk about the same thing. So imagine if you want to insert a message. It's something like, I think the Pew research that I looked at, it's like upper 70% of Americans associate themselves with Christianity. So this is a big number, first things first. So you've got all those people who are in church talking about the same thing every week. Now, all those people have friends. Remember, we I take this out into the world. I talk to my friends. I talk to my colleagues. I spread the word of God. I spread this. We're also on Facebook together. We're also on TikTok together. We're also everywhere together. And so if somebody wanted to drop a political message in there, they know what we all talked about this week. They all know how to plug that in to the scripture that we referenced this week.
Wow.
You see? Not saying that happened, but if you were an evil genius and you wanted to do things like that, you can reach a lot of people this way. That's what it would look like.
It's like dropping in a little idea virus.
So there was a lady at my church, and her first name was Martha. Martha taught 3 generations of that church. And it was finally a preacher who said to me, he's like, don't you think there's something wrong with that Martha can teach everybody? She taught us all how to pray. She taught us about our relationship with God. She taught us the songs. 3 generations of that church. So everybody in there was through Martha. But Martha can't be a preacher. Martha can't have leadership in that church. Martha would have never thought about having leadership in that church because Martha served God, and God said that those positions were reserved for men. Okay, so let's set that one aside. Mm-hmm. Martha was wonderful. She's a beautiful woman.
Shout out to Martha.
Yeah. I don't know if she's with us anymore. Martha was everybody who hears this, who went to my church, knew who Martha is.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I have a sister. Again, we all grew up in the church. And my sister meets her husband. They're together about 2 years. During that 2 years, he starts to come to church with her. Then they get married. Now, because they're married, he's a man, so he is the spiritual head of the household. She has 20 some years in the church and understanding the religion. He's got about 6 months, but he's a man, so he's the head of the household now. And she's not trying to dispute that because she wants to serve God. So you see, we have really the idea that people are stupid or that they don't mean to do what they do or that they have no sense of agency or that they're being abused in all these ways. That's not the case. These things look a lot differently. So I say both of those because when we get into the political structuring now, from the outside, the messaging, when we talk about gender, when we talk about gender roles, when we talk about male superiority, we're talking about my sister and her husband. But it doesn't look like that on the ground. It looks like I'm trying to be the best Christian I can be. When we're talking about gender and a male's place, when we're talking about Martha not being able to have a leadership position, they're not talking about it like that. In the church, that gender message is about transgender and about how they're your enemies and about there are 2 genders and everything's an abomination of God, right? So it gets so the messages are not the same as they are experienced. And so so not understanding what the reality of somebody is and what the reality of the intention behind something, what that person's experience and what their meaning is for being part of that, there's that huge disconnect because they're not hearing the political messaging and the political messaging isn't speaking to them. So from the outside, being called hypocrites, that's not really working because they don't even understand what you're talking about. So they don't really even think that pertains to them.
I think one thing that may be helpful, which it's in our definition in terms of when we talk about the political aspect of warfare, we use a term like egregore, may help explain what's kind of going on maybe with that church scenario you brought up.
If I was describing an egregore to somebody for the first time, I would say, have you ever met somebody with an extremely dysfunctional family?
I may know one or two.
Okay, so everybody laughs. So you know how if you get that family and you get one person, you can handle one of them. You can handle any one of them on their own. But when you bring them all together, then it's a dynamic.
Oh, yeah.
That's an egregore, the dynamic. So there's no more talking to the individual. It's the group. They can kind of hide in each other and reinforce each other. It's too much. It's a dynamic.
Yeah.
That's how I would describe an egregore.
I think it just captures that phenomenon of the group and its collective thoughts, what the norms are, what it takes as normal or abnormal, like that term. So even just in a functional sense, think it's kind of the top of the heap. And going back to, I actually think there's a transition, specifically warfare. You've been doing a lot of work lately around both moral injury and operator syndrome.
Operator syndrome it's not a diagnosis. It is a constellation of physical, biological, mental, relational, spiritual things happening with an operator as a result of service. I would recommend Chris Frey in this, and he put out last year Operator Syndrome, and he takes a very complicated issue and organizes it very, very neatly so you can get your head around it. He's at University of Hawaii. He does a lot of work in the SOF space. So within Operator Syndrome, there are certain chapters that I work with. It's the easiest way to describe it. So I work with relational issues, and then things, suicide, contemplation of suicide, and also existential crisis, moral injury, and kind of the darker issues. So moral injury, I think, needs a better name. I'll just say that, and I'll tell you, I'll tell you the components of it, and then it looks different ways than you would think. How it looks for the regular, like how it looks for regular military, and then how it looks for special operations. So moral injury generally involves three things. Institutional betrayal. You see the world in a different way, and that results in a crisis of identity that impairs you relationally, socially, professionally, mentally. It interferes with your life. And that break in identity, really, the spiritual aspect of it really comes from you've seen the world in a different way. In esoteric terms, they would say the veil has been ripped off. Sometimes, So people who have been in, if you've grown up in the United States and this is all you've known socially, and then you go to a war zone. I've been in post-combat, and it's nothing like it's nothing you'd ever think. So the scenarios that people live in, the material realities of people who are involved in war and adjacent to war in other places are just, unless you know and read up on it or talk to somebody who lives there, you can't be prepared for it. And what the dynamics are and the brutality of it. And it's a different thing. So when you come back, you're around a lot of people who have never seen what you've seen. They have no basis of comparison if you even tried to tell them about it. And so there's a lot of feelings of isolation, a lot of, now what you were really good at, you're now back in this place where what you were really good at, if you're out of the service, there's not really a lot of call for it. But the thing is, you understand the world differently, and now you need to learn your place in the world. And that drives people into existential crisis. And that's where suicide ideation, alcohol abuse, sleeplessness, divorce rates, everything. So when I first read about that, what struck me is that it was identical to literature in transpersonal psychology to a spiritually transformative experience.
Wow.
Yes. And that's the element where the juggling back and forth between the predominantly, according to the people I talked to, the predominantly white Christian Southern Baptist chaplains and mental health. And so it's this other space where it's something else.
That institutional betrayal aspect of moral injury may be the primary kind of thing that we're seeing lately, at least in the US political context, of feeling like the institutions have betrayed them. I kind of wanted to hear you're thinking it could be both with moral injury and operator syndrome. How much are other people really actually considering the spiritual aspects, not just the psychological?
Let me start to address that question in this way, and I'll go for the solutions people are currently seeking are psychedelics, MDMT, because they're looking for different answers that are not there through mental health professionals. And that is not against anybody there. It's saying that other people don't have the answers they need. So they're seeking altered states of consciousness in order to access those answers.
I just kind of wanted to hear again if you kind of had thoughts in terms of when people try to explain these things only using maybe the language of psychology and what they may be missing, which it may just be that perception in terms of they just don't have the sense. But I just kind of wanted to hear your thinking on that.
There is absolutely a lot of conflicting interests in this space. And we're talking about academic versus religious versus military versus secular versus academic. So like all these different things that we come from, like each of us, we come from a different place. Our learning has been different. So when we step into a space and there are things that we don't understand, we will attempt to frame them by the experiences which we have to frame them. Now, when we get into these spaces, some of these experiences, the frames that you've known before, they don't fit. And where that becomes a problem is because there are people who are suffering in really, really deep, dark ways. And when you're trying to put a frame on them that doesn't fit, it only further serves to isolate them more and convince them more that nobody knows what they're talking about. I would encourage a willingness that maybe your way isn't the way. There are a lot of ways, there are a lot of things on the table. We in this space, we imagine ourselves to be culturally respectful to others, and we can understand a concept and understand that other people do things differently. So I'll do this. I have a podcast on this. This is also in Natural Healing as Conflict Resolution. It is about the Liberian mourning feast. Each time somebody dies, the tradition in Liberia, their peacemaking process between communities is to mourn that person. You have a mourning feast for them. After the war, it was the Lorma and Mandingo tribes, Christian, Muslim, but different, hadn't had a mourning feast for over 15 years. And so they believe in reconciling with the dead, with nature, with their ancestors, with everything around them. They have to reconcile. And so they were very out of balance. So they have this mourning feast. Now, when they talk about the mourning feast, they talk like they all prepare for it. And one of the features is the role of their ancestors. Now here, when somebody dies, we were talking about death earlier in this. When somebody dies, we have a funeral for them. We bury them. And in a couple years, if you're not done mourning, then you have some grief disorder. There, other people deal with their dead in different ways. So the African tradition is they've passed, they've crossed the river, but they're still palpably with you. And the ancestors are with you because you need their help. They have a lot of guidance, they have a lot of wisdom, and they need to share it. Just because they passed doesn't mean that they stop sharing it. So what the man was telling me about, and you can listen, it's very interesting. So he's talking about the physical presence of the ancestors, and he's talking about the healers, and he's talking about the diviners and the dreamers and all of the different ways that they work with the other side to get this information. Then they all come together to compare notes, and this is what they're talking about what the future looks like. I'll leave that there, and then somebody can listen to it more. So let me bring it back to what we were talking about, if we can bring it back just in the psychological domain. So do we respect the tradition, the Liberian tradition, where they speak with the dead on a regular basis? Do we respect that as reality, or do we respect that in a really patronizing way of how cute they think they talk to the dead?
Dismissive, disparaging.
Right.
I'm wondering too. So, even terms like psychology or some of the labels that we give to so-called disorders, women used to only have hysteria or whatever. There's been a growing acceptance, or terms used in behavioral science and nudging and all that kind of stuff, which was sort of dismissed before. Everything's logical and, sort of dismissed before. There seems to be a growing acceptance of some more of that terminology or like the fact that psychology is a field, unless you're Tom Cruise, you don't believe in it, but that's fringe now. So when we're talking about things like communing with dead, or with ancestors or mediumship, where do you think that resistance is coming from, and where do you see it going as like a field or an area?
Great question. I will start with saying that before I did it, I didn't have, this was not part of my life. I didn't know anything about this. I didn't know other people. I did not know this world. So I always imagined myself prior, imagining somebody's telling me about it. And I don't know that I would have believed it. So I'll just say that. So if somebody doesn't believe it, cool, maybe this isn't your thing. But for people who are grieving and are looking for different answers, I'll say what I've learned. So this also, like you were talking about with Al Snow, this also has a context. Platform mediumship was widely used in the United States and during England during World War I because the deaths were so great. And people didn't know what happened to their loved ones. So like platform mediumship is really something. That's when you're in a room full of people, and I'm talking like a theater full of people. Yeah. And they'll be like, you up there, the third person, third row in, you have on blue socks. Okay, your brother's here. So they just did it like that because the need was so great. So it was to alleviate suffering. So that's where it has been. And that was like with groups of people. Now sittings are done individually. It's not really a seance thing. That's funny. That's like for entertainment if you go to a spiritualist community or something. But that's not really how it's done. It's just like it's one-on-one, they're conversations, and it's like you have the loved one on the phone. And so people laugh and they cry and they do a lot of different things. So where it could go, let's talk about resources. Again, let's operationalize it. If you have invested $1 million into a soldier, if you have trained them, if you've brought them along, and then the soldier is troubled by the idea that they are somehow responsible for their brother's death, or there's something that they could have done in this scenario, and that eats at them, and that eats at their bandwidth. What you have is like slightly diminishing capacity, and like they'll pay for it later. But the type of service that I provide in other people like me, you alleviate people of questions that otherwise cannot be answered. Put the psyche at a state of peace that you can't otherwise attain. You can go through the steps. Like if you go like a lot of moral injury things right now, they have these nice 10 steps. Well, having been through all of that myself, I just think like it would have driven me further back into the hole. And then you have to make the other person you're talking to feel nice. Like the approaches aren't necessarily useful. In fact, the opposite of that. So in unconventional warfare, you need unconventional healing. And that's what this is. And that's what the potential of this is.
What a line. What a bar. Well said. Yeah, that may even be the name of the episode now. Unconventional warfare needs unconventional healing. Wow, that's such a good line.
The cat's here, but she won't come here.
The cat doesn't want to come. Again, like we'll never edit out cat presence here.
Let me see if I can grab her. Yeah, little friend.
Hi, friend.
Hi. That's Quate.
Kitty.
Hi. You see this lady? Okay. Come on, pretty girl.
Right. Never edited it out.
You're so good, honey.
This has been a heck of a conversation. It really has. We always want to try to leave like our audience. What are these things that I can do or I can learn to better protect myself? They are subjecting their mind to hours and hours a day to these different sort of spaces and information. I just wanted to hear if you had any kind of thoughts or suggestions or things that folks can kind of take away how to defend against that.
A couple suggestions. I know when I was in that space, when I was campaigning, I was very politically active. I was very religiously active. It didn't occur to me that everything wasn't fine and that everything wasn't right. It just didn't occur to me because nothing seemed off. It was when I was exposed to different types of people that I saw there's more to the story. And so that expanded my understanding. So if somebody's in, like, if you're listening to this and you're wondering, am I that person? first of all, congratulations, because not everybody has that question. And then also, like, so just check out, like, how many times are you around people who don't think like you think? And how comfortable are you being around people who don't think like you think? So pay attention to that. Make a point to go around people who don't think like you think. There are also great resources, and I'll send them to you, that I'm just finding about how to detect disinformation. And so there's self things that you can take. So I would highly recommend that you educate yourself. I go through all of them, so I won't do them any justice, but I would recommend those as well. And again, I'll give those links so they can be in the show notes of free resources that you can use.
Thank you.
Brain training.
Yeah. And just like we're talking about here, people are, I remember in my political days that if people didn't vote like you, then they were the enemy. And I mean, this is before it came like this. They were just straight up the enemy. There was something wrong with them, because maybe one day they would come back and think like you think, and then that would make them right. But otherwise they were the enemy. And so if you think in terms like that, like that people would be fine if they just thought like I think, there's something the matter with that, because you wouldn't want somebody approaching you that way. And when you're in a conversation, and it seems remedial, but I run across people like this of all ages and in all walks of life. But if you wouldn't want somebody approaching you and thinking like they knew everything about you because of what 2 or 3 characteristics, and then all of what that must entail about you, it just isn't true. It just isn't accurate. So interact with other people more.
Yeah, and
Get outside.
This is going to be
Talk
my
to people.
Talk to people. This is going to be my final question in terms of technology. These virtual spaces are, if they aren't becoming the real world to people, they're becoming at least more important than the real world to people. That's where it gets deeply spiritual in these virtual spaces as the realest of real worlds, and what that is going to mean in terms of like a spiritual sense, and maybe how we can get out of there, or how we can maneuver.
From what I see, the way to build resilience around that, I myself would not be investing in how the virtual spaces are taken. I would be investing the other way. And the virtual spaces, again, the purpose of them is to give life some type of meaning and to give yourself some kind of meaning. There's nothing that I've seen that makes a person more calm and okay than knowing what they are about. And so investing the other way that pulls people back into reality and back around others, in where they can define and cultivate a sense of purpose and know what their life is about and have a direction and have a reason to get up in the morning. That's how I see building resilience against this.
That would be nation saving to have.
I agree. And it also serves to, like we were just talking about disinformation, the more actively you're involved with people and the more comfortable and knowledgeable you are about yourself, it's resilience against all of that as well.
Excellent. So that's it for me. But Jocelyn, again, feel free to.
I guess if somebody listening is like, okay, I'm gonna dive in. I'm gonna take one whole minute to work on something towards this. What would you tell them? What would you advise or invite them to do with their 1 minute of diving into this?
That's a good question. I don't know what you would do with a minute. It's like somebody who won't agree to walk across the street for a little bit of exercise. That's really minimal. But I mean, look at the people around you. Look at who you surround yourself with. What kind of relationships do you have? How do you eat? Are you taking in? What do you actually take in? So visually, like nutritionally, like what nutrition are you giving your mind? If you have no purpose, if you're not feeding your soul in any way, you don't do things that bring you beauty, that bring you delight. If you don't have relationships, if you don't have things around you that bring you any type of happiness, why bother? Whoa. And if you're not willing to do those things, but again, I take a harsher look at it. I don't really use the romantic flowery language. So we're not manifesting here. You have to usually take a machete and clear things out. Yeah. That's better the way to peace. Don't add something, take more out.
Yeah.
When I work with people, that's the process that I use. It's usually they're cool after like 6 sessions, 6, 7, but like they tell me when they're done. But for the first 3, they just talk. They talk, I write, and we just sort everything out. and then give it back. Like, okay, so here's where you're sitting. Here's what's going on with you. And people aren't so stupid. They usually know, but sometimes you need another person to tell you that you're sitting in complete dysfunction and that the people around you are garbage. Or sometimes you need somebody to tell you that what you're doing is garbage. Or sometimes there are subtle things. Usually I don't get that. Usually I get people who are in terrible situations, like unwinnable situations, and they can't figure out what they're doing wrong. You attack things one by one, and there's a plan, and it's very methodical, but it's very results oriented. So like, again, when you're looking for peace, that does not happen organically. You have to record it. It's all scientific method if you're actually looking to improve.
So I have a suggestion for everybody in your minute. You know what you should do with that minute? You should go check out Dr. Rebecca Nicholson and her work. Where do you want people to look for you and find you? I think we are going to drop some links in. Anything else that you want to say or plug?
Thank you. I sent you my link tree. So that's my books, my research, my articles. That's, you can see the whole of my work in, a couple Linktree buttons and just get a feel for it. But if you would like to schedule something, you can reach out. If you want to talk for a minute and see if that's right for you, you can reach out. Always feel comfortable. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm on TikTok, as long as we have TikTok available to us.
Yeah, like by the time this came, they're like, what is that? What is that?
Instagram, Facebook. If you contact me on Facebook, it's successful and I will never see your message. So I recommend LinkedIn or email me.
Thank you so much for coming on down to the Mad Warfare podcast. Is truly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much for having me.
This episode is sponsored by, drumroll please, well, nobody yet. But dear listeners, with access to an ad budget, you can be our almighty Atlas, carrying the world on your shoulders and helping us get the Mad Warfare podcast off the ground by being one of our pioneering plank holder sponsors, which comes with special pricing for those brave souls who are willing to stick their necks out to be with us. It could be for your company. Maybe you have a book that you want to promote and you want us to give a shout out on that. Heck, we'll take family and friends who just want to have us read embarrassing messages just for a good giggle. We'll take them all in at this point. Reach out to us at our email address at the madwarfarepodcast@gmail.com. madwarfarepodcast@gmail.com. Show us some money. Please put that in there too. Show me the money!
I've come to talk with you again. Come and be inside my head. Cancel me, cancel me. I got things to say, but you cancel me. Cancel me, cancel me. I got things to say, but you cancel me. Cancel me, cancel me. I got things to say. You cancel me. It's only a matter of time till we all get canceled and say. It's only a matter of time till we all get canceled and say. It's only a matter of time till we all get canceled and say. Cancel me. Cancel me. Cancel me. I got things to say, but you cancel me. Cancel me. Cancel me. I got things to say, but you cancel me. Cancel me. Cancel me. I got things to say, but you cancel me.